Alright, hello again to anyone watching these videos. I'm back with another deck profile. This time I want to show off the light dark Kalima deck that I've been playing and sort of testing and iterating on for the last little bit. I guess it's a 40 card, kind of slimmed down, much more sort of focused list than I guess maybe most people. I've got some feedback on this deck that it might be a little bit unorthodox, but I don't really see it that way. I think it's just more of like, again, it's a little more focused on certain goals and certain plans. And anyways, I guess I can cover more of that later. Let's just start off with the deck itself. So the first card is Stingwing, just a 2-mana blocker. This slot, there are, I guess, a number of different cards you could play. When you actually look at the blockers themselves, I think the main ones that might be worth consideration would, I guess, be like Grudge Weaver. That's a card that's kind of suggested a lot, and even the Shield Blast 2-drop blocker. If you want something cheap to play, those might be, I think, two of the better options. I'm sure there's other ones you could think of as well, but they're all kind of medium cards. Stingwing, I think, just as a blocker itself, I think personally I believe it's the best one. Just the 4,500 power, just being able to contest a lot more things. Keeper of Laws, Tricky Turnip, or being two of the more prominent ones, and on top of that, having Skirmisher is just a really powerful ability as well, especially like in the face of something like a Laser Arm Drakon, being able to take the hit and then trade with the card. Things like that. I think just Skirmisher comes up a lot. So out of a two mana blocker, I think this one is up there. Like, you could make an argument that maybe Grudge Weaver is a little bit more powerful in the mono red matchup, I suppose, because that card can trade with a lot more things like a Blaze Belcher or a Jet Thrust Starter, things along those lines. It can be a little more powerful because it can get you 2-for-1s. But overall, I think one of the big reasons for Stingwing is I really think most often it lets you trade off with your opponent. Like, it really acts as kind of what I want, which is a delayed removal spell, as opposed to just kind of a deterrent, or maybe like a delayed discard spell in the case of Grudge Weaver. I really want to just actually answer the creatures and be able to trade off on resources. I think that's like a really important thing this deck is trying to do, so that's kind of what I want with my blocker. What else to say on this? I think one of the downsides, I suppose, would be that for those matchups where you do want the 2-mana blocker, this card might be a little less consistent because it's a light dark mana, which means you need on your opening 6 or 7 draws to actually have a light card so that you can cast this. So it's maybe a little less consistent in that sense. Whereas if you're playing a 2-mana just mono darkness blocker, you can always cast it if you need to, right? There's no worries there. So that might be one point against it, but at the same time, I think the ultimate reason, the overall reason I am actually choosing to play Stingwing is because it is like a light dark card. I think a lot of what I might think makes it a better blocker than some of the other cards, it's all kind of marginal anyways. I think overall, being a light dark card, it kind of lets me consolidate my deck slots so that I can play. It just lets me free up space because I need a certain number of light dark cards, and Stingwing is up there as one of the better light dark multi-civs that I could be playing, right? And I need a certain number of light cards to make the whole package sort of consistent. So it fills that role as a light dark multi-civ. And it also fills the role of like the 2-mana blocker that I want to play. So I can take kind of what might need to be 6 deck slots or 5 or 6 deck slots and just fill all those 5 or 6 needed roles with just 3 cards. So it frees up space. So that's kind of the ultimate reason I've chosen to play it, because I don't really want to have to play like some mediocre multi-civs because I've chosen to play Grudge Weaver, which might not be an upgrade, right? Like, even if Grudge Weaver is a better card than Stingwing, I might have to downgrade other cards in my deck to like some mediocre multi-civs because I wanted to make the upgrade to Grudge Weaver. Even if it was a better card, it's not going to be better by enough to make me want to do that. And again, I don't even think that it's better to begin with. So yeah, ultimately it just lets me free up some space in the deck by taking kind of all those roles and just filling it with one play set of cards. So I guess that's enough for Stingwing. It's not like a super important card, but it is nice to have cheap blockers And kind of in line with that, I'm playing, my other blocker is Scared Orbital of Gloomhollow. Just a very solid card. Um, it could be like some more cheap blockers, especially when I'm not playing Hydra Medusa. You could make an argument. I have a lot of threes. Maybe I could thin this down, either turn it into something else, or maybe just make it another cheap card. I think I could see that. But you want enough blockers to be able to have some defense, and it's a strong blocker. Like it handles a lot of like the evolutions. Yeah, just like a versatile strong blocker, and the fact that it can attack is very important for playing, for facilitating some of your game plans that you use to win a lot of those aggressive matchups, right? In those aggressive matchups, let's take like maybe like the rush matchup or even mono nature mid range is like two kind of general like fast aggressive decks. If you want your plan in those matchups, Kalima package will be a bit slow for those, right? So what you're gonna want to do is you need some early defense, so Scared Obel can do that, and then you try to mitigate their aggression somewhat with some of your removal spells or your discard spells, and then at some point though, because you're not going to be able to survive to Kalima, or even if you are, it's going to be really hard to use that Kalima to stabilize in the face of fast attackers or more evolutions that are just pounding away at your shields, right? If they can keep dropping fast attacks like that, you're not going to be able to survive forever. So at some point, you need to kind of turn the corner, and that's what Gloomhollow lets you do. Because it can attack, it fills a great role in the deck as defense that lets you at some point turn the corner, and this can chip in for offense. So you've mitigated their aggression enough, and at some point you decide, okay, now I need to counter push. You can chip in for a couple shields with maybe Gloomhollow and something else, and then you can set up lethal over 2 turns, and this really helps you do that as like a card that really chips in on the defensive side and then helps ensure that you can turn the corner and kill your opponent. So that's sort of why I've decided to stick with 3. Yeah, that's the main reason. And then the other sort of cheap creature I'm playing is Targusher. This is a card that I've kind of fluctuated on the numbers. I think some of my earlier builds were playing 0, and then I realized like I really need something to help me handle these bigger creatures. Like my deck's not doing it well enough. I think I actually did have some more 2-drop blockers. I was just playing like a couple supplemental 2-drop blockers, and in hindsight, I should have been playing Lurking Skullcutter in that spot, and you could make an argument that I could actually be playing Lurking Skullcutter over Targusher, but so that might have been an oversight in early deck building, and then it's still something I could consider. Right now I'm defaulting to the light card so that I can enable myself to cast some of the other more important light cards in the deck that I want to be playing. And like there's some very powerful light cards that I'll cover later that really help this deck succeed, and you need enough other light cards to be playing. So maybe ideally these would just be dark cards to help with the consistency, and I could just be playing mono dark because these can easily be just shifted over to comparable darkness cards. But the light dark cards that are good, I really want to be playing, so you have to make some concessions. So that's sort of why I'm playing these light cards over comparable dark cards. That said, like you do get some value out of the light, or out of like the tap ability on Targusher. And again, basically the overall role it's playing is it's trying to, it's a very good answer to like some of the larger aggressive creatures, the larger evolutions that people are throwing at you. So in like the monolight matchup where they're dumping, or not necessarily dumping, but they're hitting you with these like, I think Sparkblade Protector, Prism Blade Enforcer, I think it's called, like just these giant 4-drop 6,000 double breakers. Like you really need Slayers to help against those, against Mono Nature, like in the face of Great Call, Roll Core, Anjak, you really need Slayers to contest those, and Targusher does that job really well. Again, it could be like, I think Skullcutter I might consider, like maybe I don't need as many light cards as I have, and I could see shifting this down to a 2-drop to give me another 2-play. So that way, rather than having to choose between playing Gloomhollow or Targusher, I can get the best of both worlds, where now I can curve Skullcutter into Gloomhollow. So I think that's definitely something I want to explore a little bit more, is maybe shifting some of the numbers around to make room for Lurking Skullcutter. Anyways, carrying on, I am playing 3 Mesmerize. I think this is one of the big incentives to be playing like a 40 card version is that Mesmerize is such an important part of so many matchups, and it really helps you handle a lot of the cards that might give you trouble, like Keeper of Laws, Broodmother, Anjak, um, General Finbar even. Like, this card can handle so many problematic cards before they're able to generate value for your opponent. And it's just being able to see it that much more often when you're playing a 40 card deck really lets you design a game plan around Mesmerize. And it helps you just win so many more games, and when you're able to count on having this card more often. So, yeah, I mean, Mesmerize is just probably... I could see it being the best Darkness card. I think it's between this and Bone Blades as for the best Darkness card. It's very close. Like, Mesmerize, I think, is a better card in terms of like what it offers you in terms of like your game plans. And it can be more impactful when you play it. But Bone Blades is a card that just contributes so much all the time. Like, just being a shield blast is, I think, what really carries Bone Blades in terms of its like overall effectiveness. Just because like it's just a really solid castable card from hand, and then at some point, Bone Blades is just also just going to generate so much free mana coming out of your shields that Bone Blades overall can be just a very, very impactful card. But it's very close. Not Bone Blades, but Snake Trap is a removal spell that I think fills like an important role in the deck. It was a card I started out earlier on in my testing with this kind of variant of having like, I think I started with one copy and I really liked it for certain matchups. Specifically, I would think even in certain situations within some matchups, like being able to clear bait going into an evolution turn from your opponent can be important. Against a dragon matchup, this card is very important, especially going second when you might not be able to cast a Bone Blades at a relevant time. This card can answer like when you're a Nyx when you're going second. That can be really, really crucial. So just being able to pick off birds, and it lets you play like a powerful game going second where you can just really take a very defensive role where you're just answering all your opponent's cards. You're killing their early creature with Snake Trap, you're discarding their cards with Mesmerize, and then while you're going second, you're kind of up a resource from going second. And as long as you can really stifle their progressions and slow the game down to a point where they're just kind of top decking and deciding, should I top deck and put this into mana to play a powerful card later, or just play this to the board? At that point in the game, you really just mitigate any of the tempo advantage your opponent has from going first, and now you're just up a resource. So I think when you build your deck in this way, you're very strong going second, and I think in a fair amount of matchups, you actively want to go second. I think it really depends on the speed. Like, I think against Mono Red Rush, especially in a matchup where they're very, very aggressively going after your shields, you should just be going first. But in a matchup like Dragons, and even some of like the slightly slower aggressive evolution decks that really rely on assembling enough creatures and bait and evolutions, and they're sort of a bunch of pieces and they kind of go all in on one evolution, those types of matchups I found a lot of success actually going second. So I think it's something to consider. It can depend a bit on your opening hand, but you should very often consider going second with this deck. And Bone Blades I touched on earlier. Bone Blades is just a very powerful Darkness card. Are again probably the best Darkness card overall. Like, this card is so good. It answers so many creatures that are just kind of pesky. Like cards like Swordhorn and like Lost Patrol, etc. Like whatever is just giant and in the way Bone Blades can handle. Things like Nyx, this card can handle. Something I didn't touch on with Sneak Trap, sorry, is like in the Mono Nature mid-range matchup even. Like a card like Jarbala Hatchery, like that'll generate so much extra resource for your opponent if they are untapped with it. Just because like if it basically draws them 2 mana that turn, like that's a big resource gain for them. So having Snake Trap to answer that when you're going second really makes up a lot of ground, because otherwise if you don't answer that hatchery and they untap and they're going first, like they're just going to be ahead so much on you. So it's important to have this kind of card to answer creatures that like rather than just playing a deterrent kind of creature like Targush or Gloomhollow that are just kind of defensive and sort of slow down the pace of the game. It's really important to actually answer their cards, and that's what Sneak Trap does. Yeah, because like when you play a deterrent kind of game, your opponent still has like a lot of options as to what they can do. Like they'll just sit back, build up a board, and then play something like a Finbar and just go in anyways. It's really important to actually be using your discard and removal to answer their cards and then go up resources. And then when you're in that kind of game, it really slows down the pace of the game to where again they're kind of deciding between making land drops and actually committing to the board. And while they're doing that, they're very slowly developing a position. And then in the meantime, you can just hit your land drops so that you can land that Kalima, and whatever they do manage to assemble, you just wipe it away. So that's the kind of game you want to be playing. If you play too many deterrents, the game just gets clogged up, and eventually they push through you with a Blinder Beetle Prime, and they push through you with a Finbar, and you're just kind of and when you're playing too many deterrents as well, you just kind of dump your own hand out there, and then you can't make any land drops. So you want to have a lot more flexibility with your cards and diminish the flexibility your opponent has with their own game plan. So that's one thing against just filling the board with Slayers and like blockers like Grudge Weaver, etc. Anyways, continuing on, we have Spire Puppet. This is, in my opinion, like one of the big reasons to play light. Just this package of Mesmerized Spire Puppet is so strong. Spire Puppet, one of my favorite cards in the game, actually. Up there, it's certainly in my top 5 favorite creatures. But like this package here is what really helps you play that game plan I was just speaking about. Like you against a dragon matchup, you just curve Mesmerize and Aspire Puppet, and you just annihilate your opponent's hand, and now you have this board and it almost plays like this kind of Duel Masters-esque game where you're just building up a board slowly, and then you're also able to keep your opponents off resources, and then you're just going up cards and then building up a board, and at some point you just kind of make the decision to kill them. So, and again, like also what I was speaking to with Gloom Hollow, where you're just trying to defend and build up a board and then turn the corner. Spire Puppet, another card that helps play into that game plan. And it's very good at picking like evos out of people's hands as well. So I think this core, just being able to maximize having this progression, is just so important for like the game plan of this deck and the success of this deck. And that's why you really want to be playing this like slim down, like 40 card, very kind of focused version of the deck. And continuing on, Scare Adorable or Screeching Scare Adorable. This card is a little bit kind of high variance. Like it's obviously its effect is very specific, right? Only being able to destroy 2-drops, but it's so good at what it does, and it's so good at just swinging the tempo of the game into your favor, especially against a rush matchup. Even at being able to answer like a Cyber Scamp while also putting something onto the board, it's just so powerful. And when you do get value out of it, it's just an amazing card. So I'm playing 2 copies. I was playing 3 when I was playing Medusa, obviously, but without Medusa, I think you just want to shave on the card. And that's another kind of benefit of playing a 40 card deck too, is that like you'll see it more often when the situation arises where this card would be good, you'll have it more often, so that overlap will happen more often, and then you can always just put it in mana when the situation isn't there for you. And I have 1 Underworld Stalker. This card, honestly, I don't think it's that good, especially in the open format. It's a little bit slow. Like it does a good job of kind of sitting on the board, being an effective card to deter like Keeper of Laws, even just because it threatens to be bigger than them. It's a good card to answer evolutions, of course, but I think I've found like in a lot of playtesting, like I've been up and down on this card. Like my initial builds, or my earlier builds, I should say, had fewer, like I think I was at 1 copy, then I tried 2 copies for a while, and then I just went right back to 1. I think one of my latest changes was just cutting the second for a 3rd Targusher. I think I was at 2 and 2, but it's just so much more often. Like you really want to have, like especially in the aggressive matchups, like this card is way too slow. Like when you're trying to manage the evolutions from a light or a fire rush deck, you really need the 3-drop on Targusher. 4 drops are way too slow. And even against Mono Nature mid-range that might be a bit slower, like against their slower Charles, this card is decent, but even then, I found it to rarely be relevant beyond the initial slate anyways. You're not casting it for the second time out of your graveyard that often. Or when you do, it's not really consequential, right? Like I would find it's much more important to just have the cheaper Slayer. So even as I'm kind of talking through this and thinking right now, I'm already thinking I might just drop a Targusher and the Stalker just for 2 Lurking Skullcutters. That's like a change I think I should probably make. That said, it is just a powerful card, and it's one of the few answers that exists to Underworld Stalker. So if you're worried about Stalker shutting off your Kalima, that's something to consider. Although, like, again, I don't think it's that good of a card to begin with. Not many decks would be playing this, or if the decks that are playing it, I think it's probably a mistake. But it is a very powerful, fun card. So this might be my favorite creature, just in terms of. I mean, I just really like the card. It was awesome in Standard, but I think in Open it doesn't translate well. Like, it's not good in the control matchup, just because, like, even though it can come back, your opponent's not even going to bother killing it. Like, your opponent just literally does not care that this card exists. In the, like, when you're playing against the pile, your opponent really, like, you're just going to mana this against the pile. It's just not doing anything. Against dragons, it's kind of situationally good. Like, it's going to be a good card to challenge their bigger dragons, but at the same time, like, it's really, I mean, in the face of Herald, you're probably not going to be casting this that often, so it's going to end up in mana. So I think, honestly, like, it would probably do better as a Lurking Skullcutter. Carrying on, we have three Lyra. I think these cards here are the big reason to be playing light, and the big reason this deck is successful. Lyra's just, when I was speaking to the plan of with Gloomhollow, where you, in a lot of matchups, you take this more lower curve role, Lyra lets you shift your top end down to 6 mana. So rather than relying on, like, the whatever the top end, whether it be Andromeda and Kalima, you just top out at Lyra. So you defend, answer their cards, and then you drop a Lyra, maybe chip in for some shields, and then next turn game them. So having access to this top end double breaker that does a very, very effective job of, like, answering the board. So, like, let's say you're playing against Mono Nature. You don't necessarily need to answer the Anjac. You just freeze it for a turn with Lyra, chip in for some shields, and then kill them the next turn. So you just try to use Lyra as a defensive tool, as a tempo tool almost, just to completely slow your opponents down, take a big leap forward on the board state, and then just kill them before the cards matter anyways, right? So it just lets you shift gears so effectively. And in the matchups that do go a little bit longer, like the Dragon matchup, let's say, Lyra's just a very good tool to bridge you to Kalima. Like, it's just so powerful. And I mean, Dragons plays their own Lyras, but, like, historically, like, the best answer to Lyra is just to play your own Lyra. Like, you just, they try to build up a board, you Lyra it, and now you can just crash with theirs. It just answers so much. It, like, a 6k double breaker, just, I mean, Lyra's just one of the most dominating mid-range cards ever, and, like, I honestly think it's maybe the best card in the game. Like, it's so good. So I'm just playing 3 Lyra. It's just so important for so many of your plans, and it's just so effective at getting you wins. And Terra Pit, this card is a little more just the usual. You're not casting it from hand, but you need some powerful Shield Blast, and this is just the most versatile, effective Shield Blast that Dark has, and you might as well play it. Like, the tempo swings you can get when your opponent attacks you with a big evolution creature, and you're able to just Terra Pit it off from shields, like, that's just so insane. So you can afford to play some cards like this, and Terra Pit's very good at what it does. Shred Rain is, honestly, I could probably take or leave this card. It's kind of medium, but it gives you just a lot of options, and plays into sort of the mid-range game again, where you can have something that you can play. Pick off, like, a bird can be very important, just picking off birds, picking off bait, although it is a little bit slower. Like, while your opponent's trying to recuperate or regenerate some kind of position after you've tried to dismantle it, like, you just use this to pick off some of the stuff, or even answer an evolution creature. This card's just very important for that. Like, it fills a solid role. Again, I could take or leave it. There are some other 5-drops. I think Maddening Whispers would be maybe the most prominent 5-drop that I'm not playing. I mean, Maddening Whispers is another card that I really love. One of my favorite cards. There was a time where, like, when Kaijudo was alive, I was just jamming 3 of that card in all my control decks because I just love the card. But, I don't know. Maddening Whispers I found, like, isn't super necessary, and I kind of preferred what Shredmane was offering a little more, but Maddening Whispers is certainly a card that's right on the edge. Like, it's totally playable, and you can totally make room for that card. I just haven't chosen to do so, and Shredmane is one of the kind of flexible slots in this deck. But yeah, I think, like, comparing it to maybe something else, like Ripper Reaper, a card that's commonly played, I mean, Ripper Reaper is just not, in my opinion, like, it's just not that good of a card. Like, I thought it was. Played with it, it just never lines up well. Like, this card is just does what you need to more often. Like, it lets you answer the evolution if that's what you need to do. It lets you pick off bait if that's what you need to do. It lets you develop your board. It lets you, yeah, I mean, it's just a more effective card. And doesn't require you to just make a lot of other concessions in your deck to even make Ripper Reaper decent in the first place. So Trox has been a card that I didn't have. I think I would say it's probably just in here sort of over the Medusas. It's been sort of a change. Like, some of my earlier builds did play Medusa. Like I was saying, I think I had like 3, and then 2 of these, and then 2 Medusas in some of my first builds, and I slowly moved towards Trox. Like, this is one of the more recent additions to the deck. And it's really doing what Medusa was doing, except it's a little more reliable. Obviously, it's slower. It's not going to come down as consistently well, but obviously it comes down on more things, so you can play it more reliably, and it's a card you can really play towards as a 7-drop. It's really castable. You can kind of sequence your things into it more effectively, and it does a really good job at allowing you to counter push. So, especially in some of the more troublesome matchups, like the tempo decks, you really need something like this to counter push on them. And so that's the role it does, and it also kind of plays into the game plan that you might need to turn the corner quickly. Just having a double breaker that can come down and push their shields in. So again, I think, like, you could play Medusa in its spot, but Medusa, again, like, it's just not really. I like the card, like, it gives you some power, but it's kind of situational because it only lines up on so much bait, and half the time you don't even really want to upgrade on Scared Orbital of Gloomhollow because you're just losing some defense in the process. So it's kind of iffy. The card is definitely very good, and again, kind of with Maddening Whispers, it's totally defensible. Could definitely be played. I've played it. It's just a solid card, but I've chosen to forgo it, and I think Trox kind of ended up in that slot because it's definitely a slot you need to fill, and it's a role that needs to be played by something. And I think Trox does it a little bit better overall. And carrying on, there is one Andromeda. I think this card, you just need some amount of what it's offering you. Like the shields, I mean, Andromeda is just so good. Everyone knows it's so good, but I think 4 is maybe on the edge of, like, too many light cards for this deck. I think some of my earlier builds just had 2 and 3, but that felt like probably too many. Maybe, I mean, obviously you want to play as few as possible, but you also want to play the powerful cards, so you need to balance that. And I think 4 is fairly balanced. Like, I'm just really attached to the 3 Lyra. I think it's very important for the deck, but you also want access to the Andromeda. Maybe, like, in a perfect world, if I could play 1.5 Andromedas and, like, 2.5 Lyras, maybe I would do that, but obviously you can't, so I've ended up with the 3 and 1. But, again, Andromeda's just an amazing card, so it's very hard to make the decision not to play it. And rounding out the deck is the 3 Marks and 3 Queen Kalimas. Obviously, this is what makes it a Kalima deck. The kind of reason to play the darkness And I mean, Kalima is just a very important package for beating like the dragon matchup. It gives you a good top end to try and fight control. Although I think control is like a very difficult matchup for Kalima, no matter which version you're playing. This one's game plan against control, I suppose, would be to just like, or is basically just to try and line your discard, take them off resources, and try to build up like a mid-range board, and then try to kill them, and then in the process, I don't know, I suppose like you try to use your marks and your Kalimas to push through whatever board they can develop. But I think you're trying to play just a lower curve roll and hope you can get under the control matchup, because you see your discard much more consistently than they do, but a lot of the time they'll have the ramp to beat you to 10 mana for Kalima anyways. So even if this card lines up well against Haven, it really doesn't end up playing out that way, because I mean they're just so much better at getting up to the resources. Like when they have Mana Storm and Reap and Sow, Reverberate, like it's very hard. So you kind of just need to hope the discard lines up well, and even then you still need to kind of kill them before they get to the Haven. Obviously that won't be the case all the time, but like Kalima allows you to have some pushback. Even Mark of Kalima can be very good, and that's I guess what I should kind of cover next. Like Mark of Kalima is just a very solid card on its own against like the Dragon matchup. Like these slower kind of the slightly slower decks, the Mark is a very good card on its own. Just being able to be like a untargetable removal for two things, like that can be just a powerful effect. Or even like if it, I forget the math. I think it's like 1.6, maybe a 1.7. I forget. Like it'll net you like it'll be killing like 1.5 creatures at least per mark of Kalima. So that's a pretty decent effect. It just gives you more terror pits for some of the slower matchups. And then the big reason I'm playing 3 is I felt like this kind of combo was very crucial to being able to execute powerful counter pushes. So like when you're playing against some of the more aggressive decks, if they build up a board, or like the slightly slower aggressive decks, like not like your rushes, but like I'm talking maybe more like Bant Tempo or Lightwater Dark Tempo, those kinds of decks, when you're spending a lot of time trying to slow them down, answer some of their cards, and then when they are able to assemble a board and they make a push, it's when they give you a handful of cards, hopefully you're already sitting on one of these combo pieces, and when they give you the cards, you're able to assemble the combo of Mark of Kalima and Kalima, and then you're able to just use that to just destroy whatever board they have, and then from there on you can use the rest of the cards they've given you to finish to answer the rest of what they're able to muster, right? Like, so I just felt it was really important to be able to assemble this combo when they've given you a bunch of cards, because they're going to give you a bunch of cards when they attack you, and then you can just guarantee you have a strong, or not guarantee, but you can reliably make a strong counter push that way. So that was kind of the main reasoning for playing Mark and Kalima. It was just Mark lets you play the Kalima much more faster and allow you to have the card come down much more reliably. So that's why I've kind of opted for playing this card over, I mean, any number. Like there's Deathflagger, the Justicar, Agric, like these are all, even Absolute Darkness, they're all strong cards, but they're kind of situational. Like they're just like powerful cards, but they end up in mana for a amount of time, whereas like Mark gives you like a really, like, I mean, Kalima is more powerful than all those cards, right? And Mark really lets you actually cast Kalima in a more timely manner, and that can be very powerful again, like when you're trying to make those counter pushes. I don't want to be like sitting on like a Trox or like, not a Trox, sorry, like an Agrix or a Justicar. Like they can be decent, but I want to be dropping Kalima and just answering their board. So I felt like this package was really important for playing a role in those matchups. And yeah, so that's sort of like the direction I've taken the deck. I think a lot of the focus was on just making sure the deck could reliably perform and sort of execute its game plans, and make sure that it can actively, or like it can actually see these discard cards. It can actually play a more consistent game, because I don't know, like it might look a little weird. I got some feedback on the deck that it was a little, or that it looked like I was trying to be different, and a lot of the cards suggested to me were like the more what you might think of as like the more traditional cards, like Grudge Weaver. What's the card? Like Gregorius Fortress, Serpents, Ruthless Ripper, or what's Ripper Reaper? Yeah. Anyways, whatever. They all these cards, they are sort of when you think of like the traditional kind of combo-y Kalima deck. I think that's like a decent way to build the deck, the more traditional way to build the deck, but I don't know, like I didn't come to this list trying to be different. I moved away. I really just moved away from the list. Like I played the other version, and it just over time, like I kind of identified like a lot of those cards just weren't meaningfully contributing, and the games I was winning was when I was able to see my Mesmerize, my Spire Puppet, my Lyra. I was kind of able to execute like the game plans because I was actually able to draw the cards, right? And a lot of the time I was just putting in mana these situational cards like Ripper Reaper and Grudge Weaver and stuff. I was putting in mana these like this kind of not necessarily useless, but like just kind of ineffectual top end. I was just putting in that in mana so that I could play the cards. And then I was just sort of, why am I not just playing fewer cards, play more cards that help me bolster like the game plan that's working, and then make sure I can just consistently execute that by thinning down the deck and just playing more of the cards that matter. So that was kind of the direction I took the deck. And in doing so, I found more success, right? I felt like the other deck was kind of just a crapshoot. Like you're just hoping to draw the good part of your deck, and then your deck may be like, it felt like kind of weak. Like it was just like it had some decent matchups, but again, that was mostly on the back of some of the cards that are just being played in this deck anyways, right? And yeah, like the traditional Kalima deck, it just felt like it had the same, like whatever problems this deck might have against like the pile, it's the same issue with Kalima, even maybe I think even worse with the traditional Kalima. Like sure, the traditional Kalima has more top end with a bunch more like Serpents and Fortress is a bunch more combo-y like top end, but at the same time you're seeing your discard spells much less frequently, so you're not going to be able to take them off of their ramp, and again they're just going to get to a bunch of mana before you and just go over the top of you with their stuff. And then at the same time they have their own discard as well to take you off of resources, and you're just going to be sitting there putting your Serpents and Group Fortress in mana. Like, and I'm not like, I've played with the other deck, like I've played a lot with the traditional Kalima deck, and these are kind of opinions I've formed over a lot of testing, and my brother testing as well, and he kind of identified the same things, like playing Ripper Reaper. Even like Ripper Reaper is a card, like I've always thought of the card as being very good, and it's like a solid card, but we would just be consistently going, like my brother would be playing the deck and he would consistently be saying like, this card just doesn't work, like why, like even when you're on 5 mana, you're looking at the Ripper Reaper and you're like, this card just doesn't do what I want to do, right? And then you're forced to play more to the board when you might not want to have to do that to even make the Ripper Reaper live, right? A lot of those cards are just going to be going in mana. So I don't know. I think the deck is fine. Like the traditional Kalima deck is a fun deck. It's a solid deck, but like I moved away from that and I've improved a lot of the matchups. Like it's a lot better against like the mid-range evolution decks. It's a lot better against dragons, like much more consistent. Like again, like the other Kalima deck is capable of some of the same draws, but it just does so a lot less often. So you're over the long term, like you're gonna win a lot less. And this deck has just performed better. So like the traditional Kalima, I think it's like very much like kind of like a 35-40% deck, and this deck is much more of like a 45-50% deck. Like I think this deck has some problems, and that's another piece of feedback I got on when I kind of showed this deck, was like that I don't know, it felt like I was trying to be like a bad light dark mid-range deck. Like I could have just been playing Blinder Beetle Prime and then not bothered with hedging my deck so much towards darkness to play Kalima package. And that very might well be the case. But again, if that is the case, then I think it just kind of means like Kalima is not really like a playable deck, because, or like just not worth it, because again, this deck already performs better than traditional Kalima, and if it's still not worth playing Kalima, then I don't know, maybe you should just drop the whole kind of archetype, right? And just treat it as kind of like the fun deck that it is, right? But that said, I think like this deck still is effective. Like it's winning 50% plus against like dragons. Like it's got a good. This deck has a very solid good matchup against dragons. It's performing pretty much 50-50 with like mono nature mid range even. It's performing like it generally beats like the rush. Like it's performing well. I think like the pile matchup is pretty bad. And it's otherwise it's like about 50-50, maybe slightly favored or slightly unfavored against like a lot of like the top decks in the game. And I think it's just as like a Kalima deck, it still plays with the spirit of Kalima. Like Kalima is still an important part, even though a lot of your game plans are designed, or you're designed to have some game plans that are more effective that don't rely on Kalima. At the same time, your Kalima is still a big part of the deck and a big part of like why you win against a lot of the other decks, dragons included. Like this is a big core of the deck. So as a deck with Kalima still, like with the spirit of Kalima still very much there, like this deck performs, I think is like an improvement over the traditional builds. And again, like I'm not just doing this to be different. Like I've played the traditional Kalima deck, and this I think it has been like my evolution away from that list, and like that's why I've actively chosen to forgo a lot of those kind of combo-y cards. Not that I haven't, like just didn't consider them to begin with. Anyways, it sounds like that was kind of, yeah, it felt like maybe that was like a little bit of a harsh rant. Again, I think like the regular Kalima deck is pretty fine, right? It's just, yeah, I just think this build is just more, the main draw is like, as like this 40 card slim down focus version, like it's just playing more just generally strong cards, and the idea is like you just have a lot more executable and successful game plans that you can use to beat your opponents. And I think it's just a bit more refined, and again it still does play very much to the spirit of Kalima, right? So I think yeah, those are my thoughts on Kalima. Let me know your thoughts. I know there's a lot of ways you can build it, and maybe my thoughts you completely disagree with, and let me know that. I would love to get some feedback on this deck, maybe some of the ways to improve it within this kind of, or within this build. Yeah, let me know your thoughts. Let me know what other videos you might like to see as well, and if you enjoyed the video, always subscribe to see more. Thanks for watching. Bye.